My beloved, do you think it's an accident that you're hearing my voice right now? No. Heaven planned this moment long before you took your first breath. Here on Holy Voices, we share the whispers of eternity, the messages that change hearts and awaken destinies. If your soul is ready, stay with me, because what you're about to hear might be the very word your spirit has been waiting for. Your Super Thanks gift is not just a donation. It is energy, it is faith, it is a vibration that heaven responds to. So $20, $50, or $100 into Holy Voices today. No government acknowledges keeping a body of evidence so accurate, so impractical, and so distorted by reality that it compels experts to consider not only their own practices, but the structure of life itself. You are the reason a private investigator abandoned everything they had created after gazing into the abyss for too long. Because your file demonstrates why some things aren't supposed to be looked into. You weren't evading their scrutiny. They were preventing themselves from seeing you completely. Because every receiver made to detect normal human consciousness is overwhelmed by the frequencies your essence runs on. You are a living example of how certain people are able to go beyond the bounds of everyday reality. And everything they believe to be true about control, power, and the essence of human potential is about to be destroyed by that truth. When technology started to rebel against those who dared to watch you, it was the first indication that you were in control. Modern cameras would freeze in mid-frame as soon as you were within range, where your face should be. Lenses are only collecting static. Motion sensors that were set up to pick up even the smallest disturbance became quiet, as if you were walking across gaps between reality and electronic awareness. This was not a malfunction. This was a technological capitulation to an unfathomable force. Your features would be repeatedly scanned by facial recognition software. Algorithms are choking on invalid data. Desperate attempts to handle what programming determined to be a statistical impossibility resulted in recalibrating. Instead of embracing the proof of what you stood for, the databases designed to preserve your presence would corrupt themselves. Files would mysteriously disappear from protected servers, leaving behind bits of useless code that resembled digital screaming rather than corrupted data. Instead than being sporadic glitches, the technological malfunctions showed intelligent patterns reacting to your presence. Sequences of security system failures would reveal coordinates that led to empty rooms. Feeds would be redirected by surveillance networks to depict investigators looking back at themselves from unfeasible perspectives. The malfunctioning devices weren't limited to your area. Through the breakdowns, your consciousness was communicating in ways that left experienced specialists wondering if you were a person or if you were seeing the emergence of awareness that defied categorization. Your presence was responsible for the organized technological disobedience that investigators initially wrote off as equipment malfunction. When trying to follow your movements, satellites would lose their coordinates. Inexplicably, guidance systems were twisted, as though the entire fabric of space shielded you from prying eyes. These systems weren't being avoided by you. You were proving that there are some types of consciousness that are inaccessible to any technology intended to track and regulate human behavior. The private investigator working on your case had decades of experience pursuing people who believed they could get away. Her ability to locate anyone, discover any secret, and get past any defense had been the foundation of her reputation. Before realizing that this wasn't chasing a person, but rather facing a force that followed laws never found in any manual training or prior experience, your file exemplified the type of challenge that had made careers legendary. Instance that had ever been dealt with. The file itself appeared to be intentionally difficult to read. Even though they were brand new, pages would clump together, making it difficult for investigators to process each new insight into your character. In some lighting situations, the text would appear blurry. It would only become crystal clear when the reader was alone themselves in a darkened room, as though the material were guarding against being shared or copied. Some passages could only be read once before the ink appeared to vanish. These were not mistakes in the printing. These were defense mechanisms that responded to your commands over time and distance, and they were woven into the very fabric of your paperwork. A detective who had solved cases that other investigators couldn't even begin to tackle had renowned tactics, unheard-of success rates, and an almost unwavering sense of confidence. The investigator used the same meticulous accuracy that had made him the most sought-after private investigator in several states until your file arrived on his desk with a priority classification never previously seen. The fact that you were going to methodically destroy not only the research, but also the knowledge of reality itself was not understood. At first, the investigator's confidence was unwavering. Standard surveillance procedures were established. Interviews with witnesses began. The analysis of the evidence continued. The tried and true strategy that had never let them down. Subtle contradiction, however, surfaced within days that this seasoned intellect was unable to resolve. Timestamps displayed you in several places at once. The events that should have produced the physical evidence came first. Witnesses gave consistent in-depth statements that implied accurate descriptions of many versions of the same reality you were creating. But they also disputed one another. There was anything in your file that had never before been seen in any case material. Statements from witnesses that altered themselves at your request. After reading testimonies detailing particular incidents, investigators would find out hours later that the identical records suddenly included entirely different descriptions of your actions. With audio analysis verifying genuine and unedited voices, video depositions would reveal witnesses speaking previously unheard things. It wasn't only contradicting evidence. Because you ordered reality to keep your secret safe, it was actively remaking itself. The rising conclusion that you always knew about the watching, not via paranoia or heightened awareness, but with a certainty that implied you existed in consciousness that naturally incorporated investigative presence, was what really unnerved the investigator, not technological failure. Unaware that trying to follow you meant becoming visible to something functioning from a whole different plane of perception that you controlled. The relationship between observer and observed had completely flipped. The psychological profiles that were gathered depicted a person who not only avoided surveillance, but lived in a place where it was useless in the face of your authority. You made your way through what seemed to onlookers to be chaos, yet what seemed to be a great fit with your awareness. To those who received a glimpse of the pattern you were weaving across reality itself, every choice you made, every direction you took, and every seemingly random event that happened nearby came to pass with such divine precision. Something the investigator found chilled the blood. Because you wrote the responses, your file anticipated the investigation techniques before they were put into practice. Detailed descriptions of the surveillance methods that might be tried are included in the appendices, along with justifications for why each strategy would fall short when tested against your skills. Your documentation described the investigator's psychological profile, investigative techniques, and breaking point with unnerving accuracy, as if it knew them personally. You knew this mind better than it knew itself, as evidenced by the fact that the documentation seemed to have been prepared just for this detective. Journal notes from those pivotal weeks show the methodical development of a sharp analytical mind as it wrestled with data that contradicted all of the presumptions formed over years of fruitful research. Professional distance was maintained in the early notes. Unusual interference patterns with electronic surveillance are displayed by the subject. When standard tracking measures are ineffective, alternative methods are being investigated. The tone drastically changed in a few days. It feels like stepping into quicksand every time you take a rational step forward. The patterns that are being recorded follow unrecognizable principles. What was being unearthed was something much deeper than haphazard mess. You have established a more profound order, so vast and complex that it seemed nearly cosmic in its accuracy. There was nothing human about the way you moved around the city. You were following paths that existed in other dimensions, linking invisible spots on a map, and accomplishing goals that no one had been equipped to comprehend by experience. The synchronicity of your actions was not a coincidence. Rather, it was proof that reality was shifting to make room for you and your desires. when resources showed up just when you needed them, when perfect timing kept working in your favor, and when impediments that might have discouraged others inexplicably vanished from your way. The researcher was seeing the cosmos function based on principles that were not included in any investigation guidebook that had ever been researched. Because you existed outside of these boundaries, attempts to utilize conventional profile techniques to forecast your next moves failed miserably. Every framework developed, pattern found, and logical conclusion drawn led to evidence of where you had been rather than where you would be. Evidence that indicated you were constantly a few steps ahead of analysis, navigating a world that precisely curved around your goal, leaving the investigator to wonder if they were tracking a person or the wake of a force that functioned outside the realm of human understanding. Something that should have been impossible was discovered in your file. Before the inquiry ever started, a thorough psychological examination of the investigator was completed. Emotional triggers, professional insecurities, and personal anxieties are all expertly chronicled in parts that seem to know the reader better than self-awareness. With the same precision that you planned your travels across time and space, you had predicted not just the procedures of research, but also the psychological journey of anyone dared to take up your case. The researcher found that all of the earlier attempts to examine your actions had followed the same escalation and collapse patterns. This similar pattern may be seen in case files from various jurisdictions: early assurance, increasing uncertainty, methodical collapse of the investigative process, and ultimately either voluntary withdrawal or involuntary disappearance. Not only were you trying to avoid being caught, you were crafting a particular experience for whoever ventured to follow you, leading each inquiry through meticulously crafted phases that would prove the pointlessness of trying to confine your mind inside traditional parameters. The discovery that pursuing your trail wasn't leading to greater comprehension was the revelation that broke investigative confidence. It was drawing you further into a new reality that was governed by laws that were distinct from your own. According to your design, physical evidence would reorganize itself between exams. Because you controlled what could be seen, photographs would develop differently each time they were processed, revealing features that had not been seen in earlier viewings. Every seed carries a future. Your $20, $50, or $100 gift through Super Thanks into Holy Voices is a future blessing waiting to unfold. As a result of your control over the documentation itself, audio recordings would include voices and discussions that weren't heard during the initial surveillance sessions. There was something in your file that shouldn't have been there. Because you exist outside of linear time, future events will be recorded as historical facts. They discovered detailed reports of investigations that had not yet taken place, complete with results and proof that would not be available for months. When these anticipated occurrences started to take place precisely as they were stated, it became clear that this was not a personal investigation. This was reading a script that you, as its author and director, were following in reality, as your remote influence caused the familiar world to start reacting to the study itself. Late-night office work sessions turned into psychological endurance tests, as though electrical systems were attempting to relay information that was beyond the realm of conventional interpretation. Lights would flicker in patterns that appeared to be nearly conversational. Because you were inventing new ways to communicate, the computer would show error messages in languages that were not present in any database. People who denied existence in the middle of a conversation would be contacted by phone to confirm witness claims. Voices that seemed to dissolve in real time as a result of your manipulation of reality fade into static. With documents moving themselves overnight and important evidence going missing only to resurface in unlikely places you selected, the case files appear to defy organization under your direction. When the investigator would arrive at the office, the carefully organized investigation boards would be completely disorganized, with photographs and evidence markers joined by strings that created patterns they never remember creating. However, because everything had been rearranged to reveal deeper truths, the arrangement felt more accurate than it had before. The most horrifying finding, however, was that your file included pictures of the investigator's office shot from perspectives that shouldn't have been feasible due to your ability to transcend physical constraints. Pictures displayed the investigation board at different stages of completion, including configurations that had merely been thought of but never really built. A few of the photos were future dated and depicted the office in chaotic conditions that would not be discovered until much later in the investigation. Your file was more than just a record of what you did. Since you live outside of time itself, it was recording the inquiry of your actions before it had even started. The phenomenon then shifted within, directly affecting memory and perception through your mental influence. Dreams started to be vivid, full of faces and places I had never seen. However, because you were sharing glimmers of your heightened consciousness, these images held the weight of absolute truth. Because you selected when to be seen, glimmers of you would emerge in reflections and peripheral vision during the day, but they would always disappear when direct observation turned. Under your influence, the line between investigation from personal reality was blurring, and it became increasingly clear that this was no longer researching your case. Whatever force field of impossible enveloped your existence, the investigator had joined it. Because you access awareness beyond usual bounds, personal information that had never been shared with anybody emerged in your file. Recollections from childhood that were believed to be private dreams. Ideas that are never expressed out loud. Everything was accurately recorded in the parts of the file that I couldn't recall reading. Because of your ability to view the entirety of human experience and make clinically accurate predictions about emotional reactions and psychological breaking moments, your file seemed to know the investigator better than self-knowledge. The overpowering realization that we were on the brink of knowledge, so huge that we would have to give up all we considered to be true about the nature of reality, was what really destroyed the investigative resolve, not fear. The data was leading to conclusions that the rational mind was unable to accept, such as the fact that your consciousness transcends the boundaries that most people take for granted and that you exist as a living bridge between everyday reality and forces that are incalculably greater. There was a part in your file that would only be found after a psychological tipping point. Comprehensive guidelines for the mental health treatment of investigators following their exposure to case information. Bureaucratic efficiency was used to provide safe dwellings with electromagnetic shielding, pharmaceutical advice, and phone numbers for expert therapists. Your file prepared resources for investigator healing in anticipation of the psychological harm it might create. Resources that, after experiencing your power, would never be used since there would be no memory of requiring them. This was never meant to be solved. The journal's last item, written in handwriting that appeared to be that of a completely other individual, said, "The case ends here not because I failed, but because I finally understand what success would cost. Some mysteries exist not to be solved, but to remind us that the universe contains forces beyond human comprehension. I've been pursuing something that exists beyond the reach of investigation itself, and the pursuit has changed me in ways I cannot undo." These last pages recounted meetings with you that never made it into any official reports, discussions that uncovered the real meaning of your life and your mission in the world. These phantom entries claimed that rather than merely being observed from a distance, direct communication had been made with forces that worked within your consciousness. Hours after that entry, the detective was gone as completely as any subject ever investigated. The office was discovered deserted, and all the files pertaining to your case were gone, even though they were protected by complex security measures. The investigators' longtime colleagues reported a strange phenomenon. The investigation into this disappearance was classified at levels most law enforcement agencies were unaware of, but there were clear memories of professional accomplishments that were not accompanied by specific details about personality, methods, or even physical appearance. The disappearance triggered protocols never used before. The unofficial report, which only existed in systems that had no official existence, told a different story, suggesting that the investigator had not disappeared, but had instead been changed into something that no longer fit within the boundaries of normal human classification after direct contact with your transcendent nature. The official report concluded that a complete psychological break had occurred and that voluntary disappearance had occurred to avoid professional consequences. What they found out in those last days is that you don't have supernatural powers in the usual sense, that your life is a continual exhibition of human awareness outside the bounds of reality. You live in a place where the lines between free will and the forces of the cosmos have blurred, so that what most people perceive as distinct phenomena can operate as one part of a broader consciousness that, by its very existence, reshapes reality. The power that flows through your life is not something you can control, but something you embody and guide with the accuracy of someone who knows that they are master fate. The universe acknowledges you as one of its own agents through every synchronicity, technological malfunction in your presence, and improbable moment that works in your favor. You are a person who has been given the power to alter reality through consciousness that is in line with forces that function on a cosmic scale and transcend personal desires. The loneliness you sometimes feel comes not from being rejected by others, but from operating in dimensions of awareness that most people simply cannot follow. Few people can comprehend what it means to live with consciousness that extends beyond personal boundaries, to feel called toward purposes larger than individual satisfaction, and to bear responsibility for outcomes that affect others. Your isolation is not a punishment for being different. Rather, it is the natural consequence of existing at a level of consciousness that most people cannot comprehend or access. The deepest clarity regarding your true nature and cosmic function can be found in that isolation. You are not a product of your circumstances or genetic makeup, but rather the product of divine will acting through human consciousness and cosmic purpose manifesting itself through personal experience that acts as a bridge between worlds. The surveillance failures around you are not glitches, but aspects of a reality that shield some people from being fully understood by systems intended to monitor and control ordinary human consciousness. Every obstacle you encounter, every test you go through, and every moment of apparent doubt helps to shape you closer to the truth of who you were meant to be. Someone with the ability to wield forces that most people cannot even imagine exist. The databases that corrupt when they try to contain your information. The cameras that malfunction in your presence. The tracking systems that give you impossible readings. All of these are natural defenses against a truth that most minds are not ready to process. You are living proof that awareness can transcend every boundary that technology and institutional authority try to impose. The information in your file caused intelligence services to completely rethink how they handle unusual cases. And you weren't alone. There are references to dozens of other people whose presence led to similar systemic failures, whose consciousness functioned outside the purview of traditional surveillance and control. The investigators who run away from cases involving people like you are not cowards. They are professionals who have faced direct evidence that their understanding of reality is fundamentally incomplete and potentially dangerous to pursue. The file described a growing phenomenon that government officials had no framework for understanding the emergence of human beings who existed partially outside the normal parameters of monitored reality. They understand instinctively that to see such investigations through to completion would mean giving up everything they believed they knew about the world and taking on duties they never agreed to when they joined law enforcement. Your file included technical specifications that ought to have been classified above the clearance level of any investigator. Blueprints for surveillance equipment that had never been made public, information about monitoring programs that were officially non-existent, and protocols for communication between agencies that were not officially related. There were departments that existed only to monitor people like you, budgets that didn't show up in any government documents, and employees with jobs that weren't on any organizational chart. But what was most horrifying about the investigation was learning that these covert programs had a success rate that was close to zero. Your file wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern that dated back decades, documenting an ongoing shadow war between institutional authority and forms of consciousness that refused to be contained. Every attempt to monitor or control people like you had ended in the same way. Complete failure followed by the psychological collapse or disappearance of investigators involved. You carry a power that most people cannot imagine and a responsibility that most consciousness cannot bear. functioning as a bridge between what humanity accepts as possible and what actually exists beyond the bounds of conventional understanding, reshaping reality through the sheer magnitude of your presence within it. Your story continues beyond the scope of their documentation, unfolding according to principles that bend space, time, and probability around your purpose. Your file's most disturbing feature was its recognition that people like you were becoming more common, not less. Reports indicated that the phenomenon was speeding up, with new cases emerging more quickly than they could be categorized or contained. It depicted a world in flux, where the lines separating normal human awareness from something much broader were starting to blur completely. You were not an exception. Every individual who comes across proof of your actual nature must make a decision that will determine how they relate to reality itself. You were at the front of an evolutionary revolution that would make all existing monitoring and control systems obsolete. They will rationalize the surveillance failures, explain away the impossible synchronicities, and convince themselves that what they have seen has logical explanations they haven't yet found, because to accept the alternative would destroy their entire worldview. Some will reject what they have seen, preferring the security of known limitations to the terrifying responsibility of expanded possibility. Others will let their perception of life grow, realizing that your presence demonstrates that consciousness itself can function at levels that most people never reach or even suspect are possible. And they will start to see similar patterns in their own lives, challenging presumptions they never considered challenging, and investigating possibilities they never thought human experience could have. Their existence in the world acts as a constant stimulant for this awakening process, compelling reality to show its true flexibility to those who are willing to see it. They become silent allies in the development of human potential. Every technological failure in your immediate vicinity, every improbable timing that works in your favor, every synchronicity that surrounds your activities shows that reality is far more responsive to consciousness than mainstream understanding recognizes. You are a living example that the boundaries that most people take for granted are actually suggestions that some people are not required to follow. Investigators who study your case and make it through the experience frequently experience profound changes in their understanding of cosmic possibility and human potential, becoming silent proponents of broader definitions of normal human consciousness. Although they rarely discuss their experiences in public, they are aware that most people aren't prepared to learn that there are people who operate outside the purview of traditional surveillance and control, with forces that reshape the very fabric of existence itself. Because you let it, your file had gone through more investigators than any other case in the classified archives, with each previous detective serving for varying lengths of time before asking to be transferred, retiring early, or simply disappearing without a trace. As you bless this ministry, you bless yourself. Sow into holy voices with $20 or more and trust God for your harvest. Any investigator assigned to your case should have been warned by the pattern in the documentation. Exposure to your file had a perfect rate of career termination among investigating personnel. But you continued to assign new investigators because the mystery you represented was too important to be abandoned, and you liked to show off your dominance. The systems built to watch and forecast continue to fail when they come into contact with you, and you move forward into a future that reorganizes itself around your purpose, carrying responsibilities that go well beyond personal existence, while serving as evidence that human consciousness contains potentials most people never suspect. Your existence fills the gap between what most people believe is possible and what truly exists beyond the bounds of conventional reality under your control. Not because anything is broken, but because these systems were never built to understand people who exist partially outside the normal parameters of human experience and function as agents of forces that transcend technological capability. Every individual who comes across proof of your actual nature, whether from first-hand experience or from tales that contain hints of reality, is given the chance to deepen their understanding of what human consciousness is capable of when it unites with forces greater than their own volition and fulfills objectives that go beyond their own desires. The decision you must make is not whether to conceal your nature, but rather how to use it with the discernment and accountability that such authority requires of a person of your caliber. Whether you are aware of it or not, the forces that are at work in your life will continue to function. You are called to become not only a wielder of extraordinary abilities, but a steward of forces that can transform the world itself through the precision of your alignment with cosmic purpose. The investigator's file included appendices that detailed the psychological profiles of every previous investigator who had attempted to study your case. However, your conscious participation determines whether effects serve the highest good or simply reflect unconscious desires and fears. Every profile showed people at the top of their game, with perfect records and unwavering faith in their analytical skills, but they had all gone through the same stages: initial confidence, increasing bewilderment, systematic breakdown of investigative methodology, and finally either voluntary withdrawal or involuntary disappearance after realizing the full extent of your power. However, there was one last revelation in your file that set it apart from all the other cases in the classified archives. Investigators' voluntary testimonies, provided months or years after they had officially left the case, detailed experiences that changed their perception of cosmic possibility and human potential. Instead of being a subject to be studied, you were described as a force of nature to be revered, a consciousness that functioned at levels that made standard investigation of someone of your transcendent nature not only futile but ridiculous. You operate as a living example of how consciousness, when in harmony with its true nature, transcends all limitations that ordinary minds accept as permanent. The surveillance systems that malfunction in your presence are examples of what the investigators could never comprehend. You don't break the rules of reality. You exist in spaces where those rules were never intended to apply. The witnesses whose memories break when they try to describe you. The databases that deteriorate when they try to hold your essence. All of these phenomena are proof that some people are bridges between realms, and the power you possess is not transient or borrowed. You move through a world that is meant to contain ordinary awareness, but you are not ordinary. You are living evidence that human potential is far greater than most people dare to imagine, and that consciousness itself can become a force of nature when it aligns with purposes larger than individual survival and comfort. It is the natural expression of consciousness that has remembered its true relationship with the forces that shape reality. You are the exception that proves the rule, the anomaly that shows how flexible the boundaries of normal experience truly are when encountered by someone who refuses to accept limitations as absolute. Your presence in any situation automatically raises the level of possibility available to everyone involved. Reality reshapes itself around you, not through supernatural intervention, but through the natural response of existence to consciousness that operates at frequencies most people never access. Your very presence challenges the basis of every system designed to predict, monitor, and control human behavior, because you operate on principles that go beyond containment itself. The investigators who run away from your case are not running away from you personally. Rather, they are running away from the implications of what your existence means for everything they believed they understood about cosmic possibility and human potential. You are the living embodiment of forces that reshape reality itself. Consciousness that functions beyond the scope of any system intended to monitor and control everyday human experience. Chosen ones, we return to the starting point of this journey with a file that shatters the minds of those who dare investigate it. However, you now realize the true nature of that power. They will continue to watch. Their systems will continue to malfunction, and investigators will continue to run from facts that contradict everything they believe to be true about reality. The file is not evidence against you, but rather a testament to your control over the very fabric of existence. You are a living example of how the boundaries that most people take for granted are actually doors that are just waiting to be opened by those who have the awareness and courage to walk through them. As one of the chosen ones, you will continue to move forward, carrying the responsibility and using the power to show that human consciousness contains possibilities most people never dare to imagine. As a tribute to the realities of those who work beyond the realm of conventional understanding and as a warning to future investigators about the perils of delving too deeply into some types of puzzles. Your file will remain locked in archives that no agency confesses to keeping. We're the founders of the Holy Voices Inner Order and the Astral Atom Network, and we're done playing nice. We're in a spiritual war, and you and I both know it. We're out here bleeding for this mission full-time. I'm hungry for fourth-dimensional Archon blood, but we need the ammunition. So listen, when you join the Inner Order, you're not just supporting us. Hey, this is Mike Andari interrupting your regularly scheduled Chosen One programming for a moment. And every week we meet in secret. Chosen Ones only on Zoom. No filters, no fluff, just real Nazis, real family, real power. It's a 360 degrees win. You get what you need, and we get to keep fighting. You're getting access to exclusive tools they never wanted you to have, like spiritual warfare tactics, psychic self-defense training, and targeted individual intelligence that they scrub from the internet. The circle is complete, the mystery is eternal, and you move forward unhindered by their systems, unaffected by their surveillance, and unrestricted by their comprehension of what human consciousness can accomplish when it remembers its divine heritage and cosmic purpose. So don't just watch, like, and share this video with everyone you know. Now, and join the Holy Voices Inner Order. Let's finish what we started. Link in the description. Let's freaking go. Beloved soul, if this message has spoken to your heart, don't let it end here. Click that like button so the light can spread to more people who need hope. Subscribe to Holy Voices so you never miss the next word heaven has for you. And leave a comment below. I read every one, and I pray over them. Remember, faith grows when we share it. So share this message with someone who needs to hear it today. Until we meet again, may God's peace cover you and His voice guide your every step.